Welcome to Woodbury University Studio 7500, the show where we discuss arts, media, and culture in Los Angeles. I'm your host, Casey Theros, and I'm joined today by our guest, Mimi Chao. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Mimi Chao, who is an LA-based artist with a very fascinating journey of pursuing a career in a creative field. We will be discussing issues such as pursuing your passions in life, destigmatizing Asian and gender biased stereotypes, and how mindfulness practices can inspire creative pursuits. But before we dive in, let's take a quick moment to introduce our guest. Mimi Chao is the creator and business owner of Mimo Chai, which is her art shop where she sells her projects through prints and physical merchandise. I actually went to the Renegade Craft Fair in November of 2022, and this is where I first saw Mimi's work. I immediately loved her whimsical artistic style, and I purchased a few items from her booth at the craft fair. I later found out that Mimi has had some twists and turns on her journey to creativity, since Mimi initially had a career in law. After Mimi achieved her goal of working with her dream firm, Latham and Watkins, she realized that this career was not aligning to her true self. After taking a leap of faith and leaving her 9 to 5 job, Mimi discovered that she could become a freelance illustrator. In 2015, she left the salaried world and began working for herself. 7 years later, Mimo Chai is successful and is a dream come true for Mimi. Mimi is currently a soon to be certified meditation teacher and utilizes mindfulness practices in her creative pursuits. Welcome to the show, Mimi Chao. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. That was so nice. I'm happy to be here.
That's so awesome that I'm even talking to you right now.
So
If
nice.
if not, we can get started with the
Yeah.
interview. Okay. Um, would you mind sharing with us the types of art you create and how you would describe your artistic style?
Sure. It's evolved since I've started, but I would say that it's always been, maybe even on a subconscious level, a reflection of my personal journey. So when I started, my dream was actually to make picture books, and I did make those. And one of the ones that I did was called Let's Go Explore. And it was kind of, on its surface about these two little kids, like exploring the world and understanding what it means. But it really is also a reflection of my own journey of kind of
Mhm,
starting out, kind of not really understanding what it really means to live a meaningful life, having to learn how to be lost in order to kind of find my way back to myself. And so, in that way, like no matter what formats I've been doing in art, it's always been kind of, I think, a reflection of my own exploration, my own reflections, and understandings of where I am in my life. And I think that makes sense because of my journey of how I've gotten here. And now I still want to do picture books, but I've also expanded it to be a little bit more reflective of where I am right
mhm,
now with my mindfulness practice, kind of a renewed interest in kind of traditional East Asian art. And so now my work is still digital, but I've learned traditional painting as well, and kind of trying to incorporate all of it together so that I can find my own way to express um, like my personal identity and also views on life, and hopefully
mhm.
sharing concepts that I found really helpful in my own journey through art. So that's where I'm at right now.
That's so awesome. I love how you're using art to like find yourself and express yourself. And I think so many of us can do that like in different ways. So
Right.
thank you for that. But we can move on to the next question. What are the visible influences of your ethnic identity in your artistic style? And you kind of talked about this in the previous question.
Yeah, I love that question because it's something that I wasn't really cognizant or like kind of intentionally thinking of when I first started. At the time, I was just like, I want to draw. I like picture books. I like the style of this kind of modern illustration. And that was really how I saw it. I really honestly didn't think that much about my cultural influences. But
Mm,
looking back and even now, even more clearly, growing up, I loved Sailor Moon. I loved, Hayao Miyazaki, of course. I
mhm,
love, like, all of the Totoro and um,
mhm,
this Mononoke, and that inevitably seeped into what I like. And I
mhm,
think, to me, there's a clear merging of East and West influences in what I do.
mhm.
And now it's a lot more intentional. Like I've really developed this deep interest in looking at traditional Chinese and Japanese ink brush painting and woodblock
Right.
prints. I think that the whole I mean, I didn't even know about this until I looked more deeply into it, but the East Asian approach to art is very spiritual. And
Mhm,
it's a lot about kind of expressing the spirit of the artist rather than rendering, like a super realistic look. And
mhm,
it's about kind of the artist becoming one with the brush and like internalizing the spirit of what they're observing and then expressing it
mhm,
through their artwork. And I just love the beauty of that. And so I don't want to recreate the traditional practice. Like in some ways, um, I would say the maybe restraining part of that practice is a lot of times it's very, you have to copy your teachers like for years before you're allowed to
mhm,
move on to your own. And just my personality wise, I'm like, okay, like that part is not for me, but just, being
mhm,
able to pull the parts that resonate with you from different practices and bringing them together is
mhm.
part of, what I find really beautiful about the creative practice. And now, in my work, it might not be obvious right away, but if you look at it, there's a lot of negative space. There's a lot of kind of gesture and flow that I feel really pulls from that traditional practice. And I also combine it with kind of the more graphic illustration style that is more popular in the West.
Definitely, I totally see that use of that kind of spirituality in this like Asian ethnic kind of art in your artwork, and it's so beautiful to see like how you express that in your own way. And I think everybody can have like different ways they take from these precedents, and
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
amazing to see. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for that. How did you get the name Mimo Chai for the art studio?
I love that people don't see it because I thought it was so obvious when I first put it together. It's actually started as my screen name, and it's because my name is
Uh-huh.
Mimi Chao, and I just switched the
Uh-huh.
last two letters of my name.
Oh. I'm like, "Oh, I wonder how you got that." I'm like, "Okay, I get Mimi, but"
Yeah, it's always like, "Oh, it's so creative." I'm like, "To me, I just switched the last two letters of my name." And so definitely when I started, it wasn't an intentional I didn't think like, "Oh, this is gonna be the name of my future studio." It was just my
Right.
Instagram handle, but it's worked out, and what I really like about it now is that it's so doesn't like, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, and so
Right.
it's evolved and adapted with me. It worked when it was more of, like,
Mhm.
this children's picture book brand, and now
Mhm.
as I, explore more of this mindful, creative, spiritual approach, like, it still kinda works, and so, yeah, it's my identity, but I appreciate actually that people don't realize it's also my name.
Ye yes, definitely, like, I think it's cute how you have that little, like just it's a small change, but it's just, like,
It changes
totally something,
everything,
like
yeah.
yes, it totally changes everything, I love it. It's just it's almost like a musician's name or something, like, how they kind of, like,
Right,
make it, so I
yeah,
love that. So, thank
never
you for
know.
yeah, thank you for solving that mystery for me. I was like thank you, on your website, when talking about your childhood, you stated creativity was seen as something you grew out of, not something you turned into a career. Could you elaborate on this?
Yeah, that's not what I thought. That's what was really kind of ingrained in me from other
Mhm.
mostly like, parental and society.
Right.
When I was growing up, especially I feel like in the Asian American community, creativity was not seen as a viable career path. It wasn't seen
Mhm,
as something worthwhile to pursue seriously. At most,
mhm,
a hobby on the side, if that. And I was always creative growing up. I didn't think to myself like, "Oh, I'm so creative." Just I think as most kids are, you are creative.
right.
And it was just like, "Okay, well that's nice. Like that's cute and you'll grow out of it." Um and I distinctly remember like hearing those words from I'm pretty sure it was my dad and him just being like, like don't think of it as a career option because you'll grow out of it and you'll lose interest in it eventually. And there's a part of me that believes that in a way because, when you hear something so much as a kid, you do start to believe it. And when you don't see role models in that field, you believe it too. When I was growing up, I really had no role models in that field. Instagram and social media obviously wasn't a thing. And
Right.
so I just thought, everyone who looks like me, yeah, follows this other path. And it took me a really long time to kind of realize that it wasn't something I was growing out of. If anything, I felt that it was getting louder and louder, and I really missed that side of me. And that's what a big part of what pushed me to try to figure out what that was.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I
Like,
hear
I
so
think
many people now say like, "Oh, I wish I was creative like you," or like, "I'm not creative." And I always say like, "I definitely think you are creative." I think everyone is creative. And I don't even mean that in a cliche way. I just think that as humans, we're naturally creative. And I think
mhm,
it's sad that people are trained to think that they are not creative. So that's a big part
mhm,
of what I want to kind of highlight or share the message of.
definitely. I think I totally agree. Like, we are all creative. It's just we can be creative in different ways, but when we're told, like, you can't be creative or you can't
Yeah,
make success out of it, then it's just harder to see that, like, nobody that looks like you is out there and putting themselves out there too. So I
exactly.
appreciate you being like a part of that journey and being like a pioneer for people like me that can like be
Oh,
like,
that's
okay, I actually
nice.
can do this. Like, that's amazing. But
Yeah. And also, yeah, I think it's a great point to emphasize that it's not just like everyone needs to draw, or everyone needs to
mhm,
be a visual artist to be
mhm,
creative. I just think it's such an innate human skill that we should all be honing and encouraging in
right.
kids and young adults because like a scientist, like I would want them to be super creative and come up with
Right.
amazing inventions,
Mhm,
or anyone in any field can like find ways to improve their craft and that takes creativity and creativity is really to me like a muscle that we all have, but you need to work it out and believe that you can work it out. If you think you just don't even have it, then there's no way to kind of continue to grow that. And I
mhm,
just believe like the more people who are in touch with their creativity and express it in the world, like the better off like everyone will be.
definitely. I totally agree. But like, what kind of Asian and gender-based stereotypes did you feel were like an obstacle reaching success in life?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I grew up in a unique environment. I grew up in the
Mhm,
66 in LA in Alhambra,
mhm,
very Asian dominant
mhm,
neighborhood. And so, in one sense, I never felt like a minority, like I'm the only Asian person or that I was, ostracized for my race. And at
right.
the same time, I realized I was in a bubble. It's like hard to tell you're in the bubble, but I obviously could tell like I was in a unique situation. And so I understood that there were kind of perceptions about, my culture and ethnicity and gender and it coming together, kind of like the really passive Asian girl, and
Mhm,
I never experienced like a direct, like, you can't do this because you're this way, but there's a kind of these unspoken, currents or feelings.
mhm,
And especially growing up without that creative role model, I feel like the cultural side really played a big part of that. And
right.
there was a time where I felt really frustrated with my parents, but now looking back, I really feel, they did their best and they're a product of
Mhm,
their generation and,
right.
they really meant well. So I don't blame them. And it's also kind of like on our generation to move past that and continue to evolve. And
Mhm,
then it was interesting as I moved into kind of college and then law school, a law firm, and even at the design agency, I really noticed how it was interesting. I worked at this great firm, to be honest. I really
mhm,
admire Latham and Watkins. They pushed so hard for diversity. There were actually
mhm,
more Asians there than many other of the firms that I interviewed at, and was one of the main reasons why I went there. Like they even had Asian
right.
partners, which was,
Mhm,
very rare. And so they made the big effort to do that. But it was so interesting. Like even despite their best efforts, you see kind of these different ethnic and gender norms play out. Like there were so many Asian women at the lower junior associate ranks.
mm,
And they work so hard. They're like some of the like partners' favorite associates because they work super hard, they don't complain,
right.
and they're really passive. And I've just kind of seen
Mm,
this repeated so many times. Like my husband who works at a big architecture firm, or my friends who work
mhm,
at banking, it's so common that the Asian females are like these cherished associates because they're such kind of these obedient workers to for lack
right.
of a better word, but you don't really see them like rise to the top because they tend to not speak up for themselves.
Mhm,
They don't put themselves out there for like the raise or the promotion, and
mhm,
that's another thing that I feel really passionate about to kind of encourage. Asian females specifically, but also kind of like Asians in general to kind of hone that communication ability to be able to feel like they can stand up for themselves or know how to kind of speak about their work in a way where they don't feel like they're bragging or they don't feel like
Mhm.
they're complaining, so that their voice is being heard. And that's something that I don't it's interesting, like, being in the creative world, there is kind of, to me, a lot less of a sense of it doesn't really, to me, matter what your gender or
Mm.
ethnicity is, which is beautiful. At the
Right.
same time, like, now my motivation is really more for representation and to just kind of be there because I'm a naturally more introverted person. Like, I think if
Mhm.
it would just completely left up to me, I would be happy, like, kind of hiding in my little cave just making art and stuff, but I do
Mhm.
feel that I was so inspired to see other people who are like me working in the creative field that to pay it forward, like just kind of being present and showing and sharing what I do is something that, like, even if it's not for me, like, I feel that it's important to just be there so that other, like you said, like other people can think like, oh, I can do that too. Like
Mhm.
normalizing it and making it seem like you don't have to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Like there's many other
Right.
ways to thrive now.
Definitely. I totally agree. I think we need to kind of gear away from these like stereotypes and realize that like this is a new kind of generation, new era that we're living in, and like life is way too short to not do what you love, I think,
Right.
is just the way. Um, but I was also wondering, in what ways your background in law assisted for you to run your own business,
Yes.
if any.
Yes. I think that's a great question because people are always asking, like, oh, do you like regret leaving the law or do you regret going into the law, like spending all that time and effort to do something that you eventually left? And
Hmm.
I really believe, like, not just in my case, but in any person's life story, like I don't regret what happened to me or the path that I went down because I feel like
Hmm.
it gave me such a unique perspective and experience. And of course, it's all about like how you want to look at it. If I looked at it as
Right.
like I wasted my time, I wasted money, I disappointed people. Like you can, of course, go down that hole of being like, oh, like big regrets. On the
Right.
other hand, I really look at it as, that gave me such an empathetic position. Like I can relate to just so many other people like me who maybe went down a path that other people told them they need to do. And
Hmm.
then they actually wanted to do something else. Like that's a very, unique position to be in and yet very relatable. And also, it just gave me so many skills that now I'm seeing like many creatives don't have. Like I've talked to so many people who went to art school, they're like, we never learned anything about how to run a business or like how to survive in the real world.
Right.
And that was, the kind of the best training for me in some ways. Like law school was an amazing experience in kind of being super disciplined, super organized, like being really able to process information and communicate it in a clear way, in a persuasive way. And then at the law firm, working with these super sophisticated clients and big companies helped me become not afraid or intimidated by, like C-suite
Right.
people or like working with bankers or whatever it is, things that might intimidate a creative. I just feel like actually they're just normal people. And I felt
Hmm.
that that was something I didn't necessarily see as a positive when I left, but now having done this for many years, I just see so many ways that kind of having a business experience and kind of a corporate background can really help
Hmm.
a creative because I also have a lot of artist friends or creative friends who feel like, they don't know or can't kind of do it themselves or like do their own
Hmm.
thing more because of the creative side. Cause I'm like, your skills are better than mine. But kind of there's this whole other half to knowing how to run a business and have the self-discipline to be able to work for yourself. Like it sounds so free and chill to work for yourself, but it's totally like two sides of a coin, right? Like,
Hmm.
yes, working for a salaried position at a company feels like limiting, but someone's taking care of all the logistics and all the admin. Like you just do your job and you get a paycheck. And then on the other side, having a lot of freedom sounds great, but then you're in charge of all of those things, And
Hmm.
so you really have so much responsibility and have to take ownership for what you do. And for me, kind of the law side really helped me so much in kind of being able to make the most of wherever I was on my creative journey. So in the beginning, like
Right.
obviously my skills were very, to me, like novice, like kind of still learning how to do things, but I had to make it
Right.
work in year
Mhm.
one. And so being able to kind of assist, I would say, wherever I was having a gap on my creative side with kind of the experience of kind of running a business, or not running a business. I hadn't had that experience before, but just having the
Mhm.
professionalism to know that I can figure things out, I can teach myself things, and then be professional in how I communicate with clients. That was a big part. And another thing I would say is, I remember hearing, I must have been a podcast or some sort of book. That there's really like three things like of a client working with anybody, right? It's how good you are skill wise, and then how easy you are to work with, like friendly or like easy to communicate with, and like whether you're on time with your things. And they're like, most people just need two of those things to be able to be pretty successful. Like either you're really good and easy to work with, but maybe you're late, or like you're
Yeah.
really, really hard to work with, but you're an amazing artist and you're on time. And then
Mhm.
I really lean into like I'm super on time and I am easy to work with, while my skills caught up. And so you
Mhm.
can really kind of use that kind of triad to your advantage to see like where your strengths are at any given time. And of course, if you can do all three really well, then
Mhm.
you're super desirable in that sense. So yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was super helpful.
Definitely, I love that. I think, for me, like, I had, like, digital art classes that I took in high school, and it's something that I wanted to, like, continue to do, like, so I mean, I am in architecture, but we still kind of do drawings a lot more digitally. It's very, like, creative, and I think, when we have these classes, they go in and teach us how it is like in the professional world. So,
Mhm.
kind of having this like creative background and also the knowledge of how it will work to like create your own business is just helpful in the long run to
Yeah,
just kind of create the
great.
two together.
I
Yeah,
love that you're doing that. In your school, do you learn how to draw, like actually draw by hand?
so we honestly kind of don't do like drawing by hands. Like we'll do some sketches, but Um, it's usually online because that's how I learned,
Yeah.
online when I first started college. So we kind of just produce drawings like through the computer and through Rhino, which is like what we
Yeah.
use to model. But yeah, so I when I was in high school, I was able to know a lot about Illustrator and Photoshop. So taking like the line work from Rhino and then putting
Mm.
it in Illustrator and Photoshop was just like a breeze to me where I had friends that were like, "I don't know how to use this." They're
Yeah,
like, "This is so, like, intimidating. It's not intuitive." It's like and I'm like,
yeah,
and I was like, "It's kinda intuitive for me, but it's just because I learned it that way." But
yeah.
I think having that background of also having the creative field and, like, being a professional is very helpful because, like, I myself also kind of, like, create art, like, on the side, and I
I
have,
love
like,
that.
a small, like, really, really small, like, Etsy business, like, that I just decided to,
Oh, I
like,
love that.
create one day.
Yeah.
So, I think, like, that really helps. Like, the architecture part really helps me kind of think about how I would turn it into something big if I had time to, like,
I
really,
know.
like, go and pour in, like, everything into it, but, like, it's something that I think, like, I wanna continue after school.
Yeah, you definitely I highly encourage you. I think that's awesome. And I love that they're teaching you the business side of things, like even something as simple
Mhm.
as email, like which sounds like not a skill.
Right.
Like writing a good
Mhm.
email is a skill and like just responding in a timely manner. I'm surprised. Well, now I'm not so surprised, but like a lot of creatives are not very good at responding to email on time, but that's an important business skill.
Right.
So
It is.
these things are all, they all tie in. And I just believe that no matter what you've done or chosen to do, like if you went into accounting and now you're like, I want to become a musician, like being able to do your own books is a great skill. And
Right.
there's never to me a way that you've definitely wasted time, because as long as
Mhm.
you are thoughtful about it, you'll always see that there was something that you can pull out of your past experience that will help you in the future.
Definitely. I love that how it's, like, meant to be, like, how it happened,
Yeah.
and it's something that you can pull out of it and learn from it, which is just an amazing attitude, and I think we should all use that. Yeah. But, I was curious to know what your experience for working, with corporations like Adobe and Disney were like.
Yeah. Those are obviously like dream clients when I first started out,
Mhm.
and it was always a surprise whenever they reached out to me. I was like, "You want to work with me?" And it's interesting,
Oh, nice.
kind of like kind of having that experience and like where I'm headed now. One, it was a great experience for working with both of them. They're both such admirable companies. Of course, all
Mhm.
big corporations have their issues, but in general, like the people I worked with were really great. I appreciate what they were trying to do. And at the same time, you really feel such a big difference between working with like a big corporation versus like a small independently owned, or like you're working directly with the owner or something like that. So it
Mhm.
really is kind of a pro and more like a con, but more like, just how the fact of the matter to each of them.
Right.
I felt like those two experiences were in some ways kind of more helpful to me as a validation. There is so much imposter syndrome when you first start in like these career transitions, and I was definitely, not immune to that.
Right.
And just having like kind of those things come at the time they did made me feel like life saying like you're on the right track, keep going.
Mhm.
And also really helping, like, when I first started, I thought, like, maybe I would want like, my goal eventually might be to work in-house at a place like one of those companies, but I
Right.
also really found that I loved being kinda on the outside and just being,
Mhm.
um, commissioned and doing, these discrete projects with them
Mhm.
in my own capacity and being able to do it in my own style. And so you really learn that even within like a field that might sound specific, like illustration, there's so many ways to go about it. And those are great learning experiences for me in that regard too. Nowadays, I really try to balance, like I like working with big companies like that,
Mhm.
and at the same time, I also like to kind of intentionally work with small companies that might not have that wow factor. When people hear
Mhm.
Disney and Adobe, they're like, wow. But I think it's important to be careful not to do too much that is more just, to kind of make you feel good or like make other people
Yeah.
feel impressed. It's also really important to kind of figure out your own values and what partners and companies really reflect those values as well, and make time to work with them. And I would also say that you might think working with these big corporations would make way more money than working with like a small company. But I would say that it's either similar or sometimes you would be surprised, like the small, medium companies might even have a bigger budget because these big
Mhm.
companies kind of assume like, oh, well, you get to work with us. It's such a privilege
Right.
to us. So
Mhm.
their leverage is much higher in terms of being able to negotiate a lower budget. So it's kind of a mix, but I mean, of course, I really enjoyed my time working with them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we should definitely probably shed light on like the smaller, like medium sized like businesses that we can work with. And
Yeah.
it's still nice to do that. Like it feels like ethically right and morally right to kind of like do that in a way.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When I first started, it was mostly private commissions, like,
Hmm.
working just with individuals who wanted a portrait or something like that.
Hmm.
And you might think like, oh, that's not as prestigious as working with an Adobe or a Disney. But at the same time, one, I think it's like a great way to hone your skills and like learn like
Right.
client relationships, managing projects, and all of that. And two,
Hmm.
there's like when you give an individual a commissioned illustration, they're like so happy. They're like over the moon. They're
Right.
like so nice. And they say like, they tell you a story about how what it means to them. And you just feel so great. And of course, when you're working with like a corporation, like you're communicating with something like that's just their job, like this drawing isn't
Mm.
for them. So it's like, thank you. That's great. And
Right, right.
and so it's like a different feeling in that sense too. So
Hmm.
there really is like so much like kind of ways to think about each type of client or each type of project and work that will bring you like the most benefit.
Right. Definitely. I think that reaction is probably the best part of the end product. So totally get it. But I was wondering how you use mindfulness practices in your creative process as well.
Yes. That is my big passion now, along with creativity. So, my background is that I would say I grew up very not mindful. Like, not that I was
Mm,
taught not to be mindful, but it just wasn't a conversation growing up, and I was really not exposed to any of the practices. I think it's very common in my generation, and I would say when I left the law firm, I was really just focused on like the creative path. Like, of course, there was an element of like who am I and
right.
what do I want out of life, which now I realize is very integral to the mindfulness path, like the self-reflection, kind of really going within. But I didn't think that's what I was doing at the time. I was just like, I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And I would say I was very not mindful in the sense that I was always living in the future. I was always thinking
Mm,
about um, what's next. And I think that's a very common thing that gets ingrained in you in the way that our education is set up, in the way that our lives are generally set up. It's kind of like, okay, you're going to go to high school, to college, maybe to grad school, go on to this job, get this promotion, try to get the next promotion, and like keep trying to climb, right? And and in and like I feel like going through a professional route like law ingrains that even more because you're always like you have to get a certain GPA and LSAT score to get into law school. And then in law school, you have to get a certain GPA. So you're always competing. You're always like striving. And
mhm.
there's always something else. Like you get into your dream law school. Then you're like, got to get into your dream firm. And at the firm, you're like trying to make partner. Like it just never stops. And then
Yeah.
like I remember the partners, like there's then the junior partners who feel like, oh no, I just strive to be senior partner. It
Oh
just
my gosh.
and
Right.
I felt I recognized that in myself as I
Mhm.
was getting into the creative field. Like I actually didn't even see it as an issue, but I would I I had started with just kind of like I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to give it a
Mm,
try. And then, things started happening like I published a picture book and I remember when I started that was my dream. And then I worked with Disney and like I would have definitely thought, that's my dream. But I felt like with
right.
every time I reached these goals, I was like, yay, but I was already like, but what's next? Like
Oh.
how do I achieve even more success or like
Mm,
what's the like oh this small project with this company was great but how about a bigger project and I just realized like okay I'm doing what I love and this is my dream and yet I still feel this sense of dissatisfaction or constant striving and not enough inside and that really made me think like well then what is it like what am I missing and so kind of the creative path really started naturally dovetailing with this mindfulness meditation path because I just found that I mean, I tried probably many different things, but I found that the meditation path really helped me the most in terms of like teaching me ways to like ground myself, shifting my perspective in a much to me healthier way now, learning to be in the present moment and not to strive and to approach life with a lot more ease. And there were just so many things I had to unlearn along the way that I don't think just being creative and doing what you love will lead you to that path. There's so many creatives who are still unhappy, and they're tormented artists.
right.
And so I really feel like the meditation mindfulness practice is beneficial to anyone in any field. And I just find for me personally so much overlap between mindfulness and creativity because it's all about becoming aware really learning to see and observe and being able to see like the beauty in the world and so that's an obvious tie into art and creativity and also just like kind of the lessons of being able to approach things with ease and going with the flow is such a healthier way to kind of approach any journey in life to me so that you can enjoy both the present moment and still move forward. It doesn't mean like you become content with where you are and then you just don't move. I think that's a lot of people's fear when they hear like mindful or like think of a monk and like, well, I don't want
Yeah.
to just sit there and like not progress in life. But it's
Right.
actually, I really feel like to try to, put it in today's terms, I feel like you can get ahead by slowing down because it's not that you just become complacent, it's that you actually strengthen yourself from within and then are able to move forward with a lot more clarity and intention rather than just like constantly like scurrying towards the next goal, if that makes sense.
definitely. I think we are all kind of sometimes like that where we just are very future oriented, where we forget to live in the present. And I'm like a I'm I do this all the time too. And it is kind of like a schooling thing too, where it's like, oh well, this week I have this that I have to do, and I have this project due, so I have to do this this week, and
Yeah.
it's just like one thing after the other. And I think being able to meditate and like find time to maybe like write something that we thought was like really nice today, or like something that you saw, or take a picture of like the sky that like just made your day. I think like finding those moments in life are really important just for anyone, regardless like if you're in a creative field, it's just important to like stay in
Yeah.
that present moment.
Yeah, and I
But
think what a
yeah.
lot of people don't realize is that the meditation practice is not simply, just in that moment to, just to be like, I love the bird and the sky, like that. There's that too, but the practice of meditation kind of helps you become very mindful of everything, including
Hmm.
yourself. And so being able to catch your reactions and your, like the whole concept of you're not in control of what necessarily happens to you, but
Hmm.
you can be completely in control of how you react to things. And that is important
Hmm.
regardless of what you want to do. If you want to become a CEO or, a doctor or anything really, like being able to maintain that kind of centering and balance and make clear choices even in times of emergency isn't something that you hone in times of emergency. It's something that you can really cultivate when you have the time to kind of learn to practice mindfulness so that when like the time comes, like you're able to respond in a way that will help you make the right choice.
Definitely. I think that's so truthful, and that we need to just be able to kind of recognize like our own reactions to our own life and realize what is like serving us or what's not serving
Yeah.
us. But I was just wondering how you think society can implement mindfulness practices, like for those that are like overwhelmed by life or work, and maybe those that aren't in a
Yeah.
creative field.
Yeah. I mean, I really do believe that it applies to just anybody from little
Mhm.
kids to retired people to people in the depths of their career right now, and creatives, of course. I just find that I'm just so happy, first of all, to see like it's starting to be something that's taught in schools to
Mhm.
like little kids can understand it too. I love
Mhm.
that. I feel like your generation is a lot more cognizant of mental health and trying to move away from that trend of always trying to compete and like be number one and burn out and
Mhm.
all of that, and move more towards like kind of a holistic approach to life that's balanced um, and we're very fortunate and blessed to kind of live in the times that we are,
Mhm.
and there really is, we don't have like kind of as much of that like need for survival. We can focus on
Mhm.
what it means to be healthy. And so to me, having a mindfulness practice, if everyone had one, would be incredible because there's just so many aspects to it, like both for your own personal well being, you're able to kind of find balance, you're able to bring your own sense of calm. It's all about having like an inner sanctuary so that no matter
Mhm.
where you are or what is happening to you, you always have a place to return to and ground. And it might feel or sound selfish for a bit because it's all about like
Mhm.
self-healing or like self balancing, but there's a really kind of common teaching or idea that the best way to help the world is first to help yourself and like heal yourself, because you might think that you're trying to help a cause or you're trying to help others, but if you bring this sense of tension and unease and kind of just hate, it really harms the cause overall,
Mhm.
because the intention might be good, but if the approach just ultimately adds more conflict to the situation, I
Mhm.
feel that it's counterproductive in its own way. And so through the practice of mindfulness and meditation, people can start to see like one of the key concepts is like interbeing and interconnection with all living things. And so it really helps with I feel like all of the issues that our generation and the younger generation wants to address. So like climate change, social justice,
Hmm.
gender equality, really everything can have its root in a mindfulness approach because you can think about it from the perspective of, okay, we are all connected, we are all one in a way, like what is the best way forward. And so that climate change doesn't have to become about like we are trying to save this like exterior earth. It's more like this is our body too, and how can we take care of our body together in a way that is doable for everybody. And so I just feel like there's just so many ways that mindfulness and meditation is critical both on a personal level and also at a society level.
Definitely. I think we can all learn from mindfulness, and it can be the root to helping us see these issues differently, like you said, with climate change and gender equality, all that stuff.
Yeah, because of course I'm very liberal and I have a lot of
Hmm.
liberal viewpoints.
Right.
And at the same time, I also really feel that the approach of trying to kind of villainize the other side or
Hmm.
demonize or like really fight them in a not not compassionate way ultimately doesn't help the cause that we are trying to solve. If we like
Hmm.
people who don't believe in climate change or don't want to do sustainable things,
Hmm.
of course I don't agree with them, but if we're just like you're a bad person and you suck, like who
Yeah.
ever
Hmm.
really changes when they hear things like that. But if we can figure out ways
Right.
to work together, then it ultimately like is a win for everybody.
Hmm. I totally agree. But yeah, thank you for sharing your mindfulness practices and like how we can implement that in our life. I think this is something that everyone can learn from. So it's just great to see how we can implement that. But I was also wondering what your process is like for creating your art projects.
Yeah, so it's interesting, kind of what I was alluding to earlier.
Hmm.
Being your own boss and being in control of your own thing sounds very freeing, but a lot of people then become stuck because they're like, I actually don't know what I want to do.
Hmm.
And for me, it's pretty intuitive, but also I'm a big planner. So I love Notion.
Hmm.
I love organizing. It's probably like my legal side, like outlining things. And so I'm actually quite intentional with the projects that I do. It's not so much like I just draw what I feel like every day. I usually start with like it's a little bit of both. Like I do go with kind of intuition and then I
Hmm.
reflect and analyze like what does this mean or like what can this become? And
Right.
I work best with like a framework. So the picture books were a great example at being able to have kind of like the outline and like the script in mind and then creating the
Hmm.
illustrations for the books is a great way for me to work
Hmm.
now with kind of my goal of sharing these like mindfulness and creative concepts through illustration and art. It's for me about kind of coming up with a framework, an overarching like concept and message, like kind of like
Hmm.
architecture, really a lot of creative projects, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then going
Hmm.
into the details. It's always like starting broad and then working to details and also being flexible. If
Uh-huh.
if I have this idea and then as I'm creating the art, I feel like it's not quite a match, then I'm like, okay, well,
Hmm.
what part feels right? And then how do I adapt the project so that it works? And they kind of inform each other. So I have a
Hmm.
concept. I try not to overthink it and overplan. And then I move on to the art. And then I work on the art and then I go back and assess like is this kind of achieving the goal that I want? Sometimes it might be that I need to adjust the style or like the art, or it might be that my concept or outline is too rigid. So for me, it's a very kind of back and forth between I would say like left side, right side brain.
Right.
I do have a lot of organization and kind of conceptual thinking, and then also try to let that go. Kind of the whole, in Taoism or Chinese philosophy, there's this concept of doing, not doing. And to me, that's really this idea of kind of absorbing and internalizing skill and concept, but then also then letting it go and just kind of following intuition. So it's a back and forth for me.
I love that. I like that balance that you have when you are creating your work. I think
A challenge,
that's
a
something. Yeah, it is a
challenge.
challenge. I think sometimes we definitely um tend to like overthink when we are creating work, especially in architecture. We're so caught up like in the concept and how it's gonna work and how it's gonna stand or how it's gonna do this.
I'm a
So
major overthinker. Actually, to go back to your one
mhm,
of your early questions, I feel like when
mhm,
I talk to like my Asian girlfriends, like that's like a common thing for all of us, just like overthinkers about everything. So trying to learn
definitely.
how to balance that is important for me.
I think, mindfulness can help with, like, that
Yes,
overthinking
very much
too, so
letting go.
yeah, kinda just, like, turn it down, and,
Yeah.
but, I'm gonna ask, the last question, which is, what is your advice for artists and how to market their work?
I will start by saying that I hate marketing. Like, hate is a strong word. I Marketing is not something that comes naturally to me because I
Yeah.
a lot of creatives can relate, or a lot of Asian girls can relate. That
Mhm.
feeling of putting yourself out there, talking about yourself comes with this ick factor that is hard to shake. And I try to really spend actually time meditating on what part of that is genuine and what part is that kind of like this um, cultural gender bias that's like
Mm.
kind of been put on me. Like, like don't bring attention to yourself, and like
Mhm.
don't ask for attention,
Mhm.
and trying to both free myself of those constructs and honor the fact that I am an Asian girl or woman, and that's beautiful, and coming to embrace the challenges and the kind of benefits are part of my experience. And so marketing has always been something that I struggle with. And yet when I tell people this, they're like, you seem to be doing fine. Like you're great at it. So I also want to kind of share how my approach has been. I would say in the beginning, it was just like I was so lucky to be on Instagram at a time where it was like pretty early, like there wasn't the algorithm, there were not many artists on
Right.
Instagram. So I felt very free. I felt like I posted to me, like I would never post these things now. I posted my little doodles next to like food pics and like just random stuff. And I kind of missed that, just like the freeness and not overthinking of things. That
Mhm.
said, I also recognize nowadays, like, there's just so much noise, and like it's very hard to market yourself or get the attention. And like a lot of artists are always kind of very um mostly asking this question because they want to know how to gain followers, right? Or
Uh-huh.
whatever it is that they want to do. I would say it's I know it's really hard, so I'm not saying that this is easy, but there's this great
Mhm.
book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he's a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist. And he is asked at some point in the book, like, how do you reach success? Because this book that he wrote was like super successful.
Uh-huh.
And he was like, to reach success, like it's best to not aim for success. Just focus on your conscience and your calling. Do it to the best of your ability, and then success and happiness will follow. Like to chase
Mhm.
success, like to chase like gaining followers as your goal is not, to me, like the best way to approach these things. But if you focus on like why are you creating art, hopefully
Mhm.
it's for some true genuine calling or purpose inside. Get really good at your skill. Don't beat yourself up along the way that you're not good enough, because of course you're not. Like everyone goes through that learning process as a beginner. But I find so many people want to be like famous and good right away without putting in the time. And if you can just be mindful about that and
Mhm.
realize like yeah, it's part of the process to like kind of pay your dues, right? And it doesn't need to be this torturous experience. It's like, wow, what a
Yeah.
beautiful opportunity to be a student and to really get good at what I do and to offer something beautiful to the world. I do agree also, like there's that saying like be so good that they can't ignore you. Like I think that's
Mhm.
actually really true. Even no matter how noisy the world is, like if you're really good at what you do, it's going to work out. Like success will
Mhm.
follow. And ideally, if you did it along the way, like enjoying the process and doing it for yourself with the goal of ultimately like helping others, then it's kind of like the best of both worlds. Like eventually you'll reach success, like have that patience and then enjoy the process along the way, and don't feel beat up when your early sketches that you post on Instagram don't gain you 100,000 followers. Like, that's
Right.
totally fine. um Market yourself in the sense of, like, try to share as much as you can, like, your authentic self, and don't try to be something you're not for the sake of the algorithm or what you think is going to be popular. I feel that, especially as we move into kind of this AI world, and where it's really easy to produce beautiful art in some ways, and kind of further and further into this metaverse, people are going to really resonate with humanity and, like, honest stories and real people. And I think artists will have a bigger role in really being open and sharing of themselves, or at least some aspect of themselves. So many artists are very introverted, and I am too, but I do think as we move forward, learning how to communicate and share a genuine story is going to be a big part of how to market or share yourself as an artist. For me, changing the word marketing and market to sharing and share has helped me a lot. Like, when I have on, like, my Notion, like, a marketing task, I put, like, sharing task, and
Right,
really think
right.
about it from a viewpoint of, how can I share something that is genuine to me, but is also going to help somebody else, has helped me so much, compared to a perspective of, how can I share something that will, like, gain me followers or, like, gain me
Mm,
attention. So that's would be my advice on how to approach art and marketing.
definitely. I love that advice. I think it's important to just be true to who we are and to like remember why we're doing this. It's not for like the clout or the followers or the likes and the views. It's for ourselves and to help others in the long run. So
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today,
Yeah,
Mimi. I really appreciate you taking time out of your
of course.
busy schedule. I love talking to you. I love getting to know you, and um, just to think like for me going to like the Renegade Craft Fair and then
I know.
thinking about like thinking about like, oh, maybe I should just like reach out and like
That's so
ask.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah, I
thank
love it.
you. It was great
No,
talking to you. And I didn't get to say this on the record, but part of the reason why I wanted to do this was because I saw Woodbury, and my husband is an architect and might be teaching at Woodbury. Our good friend is, like, the chair of the architecture department, and then his parents actually met at Woodbury. So I definitely have an affinity for the college.
I love that the Woodbury universe is like colliding right now.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
it's
like a
amazing.
pretty niche college, so, you
It
know?
is. I'm
Yeah, so
very,
I just
very
love how
surprised.
that came
Yeah.
together.
Yes, thank you so much. So, I think that's it for today's episode on Studio 7500. Yeah, thank you, Mimi Chow, for your time, and thanks for our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it on social media and leave a review. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.